Welcome in, everybody. Welcome in. No matter what time of the day or night it is a great time to be a Gamecock. I am Tony, here with Adam. We were both raised as gentlemen, so we know it is ladies first. Hoops has been a little bit tough on the ladies' side for the Gamecocks this past week. So, while of course it is always a good time to be a Gamecock, it was a bit of a down week from a fan perspective. Definitely tough on the players. I'm sure very frustrating for the coaching staff and everyone involved as we are now breaking down. We've had some time to process everything that went on with the beatdown, the embarrassment on national TV. College Game Day was there. ABC was there. But South Carolina, not up to the task of what UCONN brought to South Carolina. And, of course, it was just very impressive. Straight up, it was a tough one to go through. And hopefully, as we are looking on towards March right now, something in the way of a learning experience. What went wrong? How are we going to improve from it? What is going to be going on in terms of defending down low in the paint, not leaving players as open from three-point range as we did, and we're going to focus on one particular UConn player who has been on fire in recent weeks. And this is all just something as we're now getting to the nitty-gritty, the late phases of the season, where South Carolina really needs to start to turn around and hopefully take some positive momentum into the SEC tournament, because that was just such a shocking loss. We've been very, very spoiled. Talked about this when we started out these podcasts. Exceptionally spoiled as a fan base. You have three national titles within the last 10 years. So that's out there on the table. South Carolina has found some great success, and a few within the past few years. So, we're just all continuing to settle into this and just go over the fact that, hey, South Carolina looked really beatable out there, even though deep down we know the talent is there, that they could have overcame UConn if they played a great game, if UConn wasn't shooting lights out at some point. But this, of course, is something we need to dive into right now, dissect it a little bit. I know, Adam, you were watching it as it unfolded. I had to watch it in a little bit of some bits and pieces on my phone, at least from the first quarter and then a little bit into the second quarter. Otherwise, was able to catch most of it. But not too much to miss from a South Carolina fan standpoint. What are your initial thoughts now that we're, of course, a few days after the fact here removed, and just going over everything that game brought, and other than the despair, of course?
Yeah, a lot of despair. I mentioned last time that if we had a close win over UConn at home, I would be a little worried. Losing like this at home has me very worried.
It's a little more troublesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the teams, just the way we've lost this year so far. I mean, you had the loss against Texas, which, it wasn't a terrible loss. It was okay. Yeah, they're a really good team. We kept it close. It wasn't utter domination. But UCLA just being outsized, and then UConn just... It never seemed like they really had a chance. I mean, they kept it close early on, and they were able to erase a bit of that deficit, and then it just got out of hand, and there was really no answer. It didn't seem like anyone was doing anything right. The things that we usually do right, forcing turnovers, it was flipped. The table flipped on us, and we just kept making these mistakes. And then, of course, in every game, sometimes your shots aren't going to fall, and sometimes they will. And this game, compounded with the mistakes that were being made, with the shots just not falling, it was a recipe for disaster, and it against one of the best teams in the country, and that's just always going to end up in working against you. And I have a lot of concerns now going as we finish up the regular season more towards SEC play and March Madness.
It's definitely to the point of where last year, just this team looked so invincible. They had a couple little hiccups here and there where there were some close games, a few close calls. You could even look back to the last year's SEC tournament when it took a Camila Cardoso three-pointer to win the game against Tennessee. So it's just tough to see this type of blowout. The fact of South Carolina being blown out was just amazing in itself. Nothing that anyone saw coming, no analysts, no fans. Of course, UConn had it in their mind they wanted to win the game, but I'm sure even in any of their minds and wildest dreams, they didn't see themselves doing this to South Carolina. I don't care whatever they said post-game or whatever anyone thought, that they, of course, even thought they had this potential. But it happened. We're here. That is the reality. And yeah, you got to give UConn credit where it is due. They played one hell of a game. They truly did. And they shot very well. And just one glaring thing in this game where they were able to really rise above, it wasn't even just from a straight up defensive standpoint. They were just really knocking down their shots, especially from range. When you look at our 3-point percentage in the game, 17%. That's just not acceptable. You can't win a game shooting under 20% from three. It is exceptionally difficult against a team of this caliber. Against a team of lesser caliber, an unranked opponent, sure, you can get away with it sometimes, but not in this instance. And they shot 46% from three. They were hoisting them up, and they were making about 1 out of every 2. A little bit less than that, but they were going in out of 28 attempts. So that's just a recipe for disaster, and it's just going over this sense of when you have a deep dive into sports and you start to break things down and what players have gone through, what type of adversity they've gone through, how much of games have been a grind. South Carolina doesn't really have that all too often. They've had a few this year, a few close calls, and more of those close calls were starting out the season. So it's like, all right, shaking the rust off, national championship hangover, all that. Now, all those phrases people like to use in sports media. But at this point, you're late in the season, you're rolling. Yeah, you had that close loss on the road at Texas. That could be, played into the fact that they're just straight up a really good team, and that was a tough road environment. But this one just continues to go on and lack more explanation that even though UConn had a great game, why was this game so lopsided? Very much insane in that way, especially because we were home. It's not like South Carolina even had to go up to stores to travel to this game. So, we're just sitting here wondering, all right, is this a South Carolina squad with all the talent that we possess that can get themselves back together and start rolling, start cooking as we get into March? Which is when things matter the most. South Carolina has set themselves up no matter what. They're going to be in the postseason. Right now, it's just a matter of how high of a seed will they be. But this, of course, is something where you need to see, maybe what players they need to be targeted better on the defensive side because, even with looking into things, maybe she was going to cool off. But one of the great players for UConn wasn't the biggest scorer, and that's Paige Beckers. The biggest scorer for them and this incredible output she has had, her name's Azzy Fudd, or Ozzy, I think, and she's just been knocking threes down like crazy. I pulled up the stat of her last 5 games from 3-point range, so I just want to read this off really quickly. And, you'd think this wouldn't continue. We'd have to slow down at some point, right? But it just hasn't for her. So the past 5 games, 75%, and then her lowest, 50%, and 83% from 3, almost 60% again from 3, and then exactly 60% from 3 against us. So, they just keep handing her the rock. She's been knocking it down. UConn overall is a great team regardless, but you just have to pick up on these players. Yeah, I'm not saying you can just double team them all the time and leave other people open, but being able to identify, all right, who is just really carrying the load for teams right now in this talented sense, and it truly was her for UConn, and then the rest of the points were just filled in by the rest of the squad. South Carolina couldn't recover from that. I'm sure it was a little bit of a hit to confidence when another team is making so many threes like that, such as UConn as they were. And it's just to that point, if you got to keep battling back, you need to try and find some energy and motivation when you face adversity, because a lot of teams sometimes they don't react well to adversity because they just don't have to face it that often. And maybe South Carolina now getting a little bit more of that can hopefully use that as some fuel as we're getting towards the end of the season here, and just try to become a bit more of a gritty team. And you're gonna have to have that grit because maybe you aren't, the talent gap is shrinking a little bit in women's basketball. This is something we also talked about starting out these podcasts. Talent gap shrinking. More of these teams, not just a top 1-2 team, but 3, 4, 5, 6, where South Carolina is right now, all have the capacity and enough player talent just straight up to be able to, claw their way to a national title. So, South Carolina definitely has their work cut out for them a bit. And, UConn showed that right here. Texas showed us in the last game. And this is still not to mention any teams otherwise that outsize South Carolina a bit like UCLA does. So, we have a lot of battles that could be found in the postseason getting into the later rounds like we anticipate South Carolina will get to. But not sure what's going to happen when they face these opponents and if they're going to have a true answer. And I'm hopeful that the team and the coaching staff is working on these answers because otherwise you're going to be running out of time. At this point, we are less than 10 days until March.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed in these last few games is, South Carolina has done a really good job throughout the season of keeping the stars under control. They have really
definitely
kept the other team's best players from getting hot. But the issue has seemingly become when a player does get hot, they don't know how to cool them off. We saw that with Booker against Texas. We just saw that with Fudd.
She was going off.
They just could not stop them. They had no answers.
She's really become a star this season with her three-point shooting. So she might be shooting herself into the WNBA possibly right along there with Paige Becker. So they're a really tough 1-2 punch right now for UConn.
Yeah, and they're just that we saw it, firsthand. It was just there was no answer. There was no way to even compete with the way she was draining these shots. So one thing that South Carolina, if aside from everything else that we've talked about as their weaknesses this year, slow starts or size differential, that is something they have to figure out. They need to know where the bleeding is and figure out how to stop it. And it's just been an impossibility against Texas and against UConn. And like I said, they're really good at stopping it, at preventing it, but once it gets going, it's a broken dam at that point. It just does not stop, and that's how they've lost these two out of the last three.
Yeah, it just really comes down to facing that adversity and just trying to come up with a recipe to go over that. And I'm not sure if that falls more on Dawn's shoulders, on the players, on the coaching staff overall in general, but this is something that you need to go over because these games are not going to be getting any easier. I'm even interested to see how good Kentucky actually is. Another top 10 team that South Carolina is going to host for Senior Day on their last regular season game. So that's all something to, of course, gauge. And then as we go into SEC tournament play, how is this team going to respond? We've just gone over all of this. We've seen a handful of games already this season. We've seen plenty of blowouts in our favor against very quality opponents and lesser opponents. But now, just going down this stretch when you're starting to go toe-to-toe with a little bit more of the upper echelon of women's basketball, it's seemingly tough. It's not as easy as it was last year where South Carolina was blowing out more of these programs. I mean, if I recall last year, they blew the doors off of UConn when they came to town last year. It wasn't even a contest. It was not even close. This year, very much different. They definitely had vengeance on their mind, and they for certain got it. They're doing things a little bit differently this year. They're starting to get really hot right now, other than a loss they had at Tennessee, who also, for that matter, is another underrated program who could sneak up on you. So it's just not going to be easy, and a lot of it still comes down to just more of talented players, more of this just building up of these women, more of this talent being found, more players that want to come to the Division I level and that are just having that confidence to say, hey, you know what? We can make it. We can really come together as a team. We have a good enough core. We have some budding stars, and we can fight our way possibly to a national championship. We don't want to see a South Carolina dynasty. We don't want to see a dynasty from any team. Nothing like UConn saw in years past. You want to see some parity, and that's what we are getting right now. Parity in women's basketball, which for the sport overall, hey, might make it more interesting because it has a little bit more fan interest because you're not just going to see the same exact one or two teams in there every year. Obviously, Iowa has completely dropped off the radar, losing Caitlin Clark, so they're out of the picture. But otherwise, we'll see what goes on here as we reach the postseason, but it definitely is something we need to watch out for, exactly what you said, Adam. When you see these star players that South Carolina has been able to get the clamps on this year starting to go off, do what they've been doing to other teams, there has to be a better game plan for this. I know you can't just always send multiple resources towards one player because then you're always going to leave somebody open. I'm not a basketball coach. Last time I played was in an organized sport. Now, you love playing pickup, of course, but, organized sport was back when I was, early in high school or late in middle school. But this is just something where you need to be able to analyze and just stop this output. They've done a great job at it. They've had recipes that have worked, including, stifling some bigger players in the paint. It's just going to be a little bit more difficult. Maybe this is where having Watkins would have come a lot more in handy, or having, of course, a center comes a lot more in handy. But when you're talking about these three-point shooters just knocking these shots down and you're not getting out there quick enough, you're not responding to the rotation enough. Yes, other teams are good. Obviously, they can do their own plays and draw things up to throw at you, but you're just way too talented on the offensive and defensive side in the way of South Carolina to be able to allow this to happen. On paper, nothing matters. Games play out as they will. But you have enough of the size, you have enough of the speed, and quick enough hands from what I've witnessed from these players to be able to overcome these deficiencies. And I truly hope that these players do realize that. I'm sure Don realizes it. It's just a matter of being able to have that confidence to know that you can do this, to know that you could accomplish it. And don't look too far in the future. Still take things one game at a time and just get that ball rolling again. And if South Carolina is hot, rolling into a March Madness, and they can navigate their way through the SEC tournament, I'm sure they'll be fine. But it's not going to be an easy task because you're still staring at the likes of LSU, who might have an incredible game and look for vengeance. Tennessee could still sneak up on you. Texas, obviously. Maybe even Kentucky. So we'll see what's going on with this. It's not going to be easy to right this ship entirely, but I believe if anyone's going to do it, it will be South Carolina from what they've shown in recent years, and we'll see if they could do it again.
Yeah, and, to be the Debbie Downer in this situation.
No, go right ahead.
When UCLA lost, we talked about, this is their first loss in over... Well, what was it, a year and a half at that point?
Yeah, almost a couple of years.
Yeah,
so
almost,
almost
multiple years straight without a loss in any capacity. And there was a clear reason why they lost. It's they were just outmatched in terms of size.
Yeah, of course, in the paint. They were all right.
Absolutely.
Makes sense.
Yeah, they just could not overcome that deficit. But we also said it is a long season. It's our first loss in a while. We're going to, we'll be able to adjust and make ourselves better. And it looked that way for a long time. It looked like we were not getting outmatched by size. We were able to put teams away doing what South Carolina has done best. You don't have a long season anymore. Like you said, 10 days until March. You are running out of time fast to figure this out before SEC play and before the tournament. You can't be trying to learn new things in the first round of the tournament.
It's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, so it is imperative that in these next few games, they just have to get back to what they did after UCLA. They went through that 5-game stretch where it was just ranked wins, wins over top 15 teams, I believe, at the time. And then they had that start to SEC play where they, again, went through a gauntlet and came out untouched.
They did, and that was so impressive.
Yeah, and it just seems like that team was different than the one that showed up against UConn and Texas. They just didn't have it. And, we have 10 days, as of recording this, until March. So there is not a lot of time. Yeah, less than.
Because we're in February.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So you have so little time to adjust and make these fixes when this is who you are. What the old saying is you are what your record is. And you have 3 losses, 2 in the last 3 games, against really good teams that you will more than likely have to face off at least one of them if you want to make a deep tournament run this year. So if you're looking to repeat, you're going to have to look at these games, because that's what Texas did. They looked at what we did, or what they did wrong against us, and then came back and flipped the script. So not a lot of time to fix the things that have been bugging them all season.
No, and this is still going to the point of, as we're approaching the end of the season, trying to position yourself into a number 1, maybe number 2 seed if they falter again. Who knows? We'll see. But, even looking at the likes of teams like USC, the other one, Southern California out on the West Coast, or Notre Dame, really looking strong as we go along here and as we are keeping our eyes on the prize, which is trying to make a run at a national title. But there is going to be some good opposition in your way. Last year, the only team who I really thought had that threat for South Carolina, and of course they ended up meeting in the national title game, was Iowa, because that's just how things were playing out. Otherwise, South Carolina rolled over their opponents. They had a little bit of some games that were a grind in the tournament, but, Oregon State dispatched them, blew out North Carolina State in the Final Four. It wasn't really that close. It wasn't anything that made you sweat. You're like, okay, yep, we got the national title game. We're here. Just going to try and beat Iowa and Caitlin Clark, and there you go. Slay the dragon. And they did, because, a team game is usually going to beat a team that relies heavily on one player in basketball, especially when you're so talented. So, last year South Carolina had that recipe. We had a great defensive core anchored by Cardoso, and it worked. But now, figuring out the different recipe, and we've had a good amount of time to try and tweak the recipe, add a couple different ingredients here and there, whatever you need to do. But this is, yes, getting to a point now where you need to start building that confidence back. This was definitely a humbling experience. South Carolina was humbled by UConn. Now, you got to get over these humble feelings. You got to be able to use them to your advantage. First and foremost, getting through these next couple games and then beating Kentucky. You do not want to go in to SEC tournament play coming off of another loss. They really need to hunker down and win that game. And I completely understand. It doesn't matter. They could still lose to Kentucky and go on a run through the SEC tournament and then make a run to the national title. Obviously, that could still happen. Just from a confidence standpoint, it's what I'd personally like to see, and I think it would be just more beneficial to the team to try and win out, and hopefully we'll win out the rest of their games, getting into postseason play, and just get that ball rolling, knowing, hey, you know what, we've won these games, we have another top 10 win under our belt, we can do this, ladies, we can get back on track, and you know what to do. We are a scary team that no one would want to play in March, whether they are a number one seed or perhaps maybe fall a little bit short of that, whatever the committee wants to do with South Carolina right now. As far as the AP poll is concerned, they are ranked 6th in the nation, and that can change in either direction depending what happens over the next couple of weeks. So we shall see with that, but just truly, going over and analyzing this team, they have enough of the pieces in place, despite certain little defensive deficiencies, to be able to overcome that. We've seen the scoring output. This team could have an incredible offense. Yeah, you don't want to always win games in a shootout format, but they have the players that can do it. They have the scores. They know they can do it, and we've seen that already. Some players just have to rise above a little bit, especially the upperclassmen. Joyce Edwards is certainly stepping up, and she's a freshman. Need to see some more of that from the upperclassmen, who, of course, are keeping the legacy going here of this incredible program. So we're going to see all this and how it plays out. I'm still very confident this team can bounce back, just like I'm sure the rest of this fan base is, because they have the recipe that has worked. And one of the big things is what you referred to, Adam, that crazy stretch going into SEC play where they're eyeing all those top 25 matchups, and they won them all. They did it without, well, I wouldn't say they did it without breaking a sweat. Just a little bit, some tougher games here and there at some points of the game. But overall, they rolled over Texas. Oklahoma, man, it wasn't even a contest. Tennessee was a little close, but they got that one. Mississippi State was having one of their best starts in recent years. They rolled over them after a little bit of a slow start. And here we are now, where we have to, of course, just, dig deep and just find that extra gear and not be afraid of these opponents. Don't be doubting yourselves now, because once you start doubting yourself and, you're not confident, I'm not talking about overconfidence, of course, but being confident in your abilities, focusing on what worked, relying on your teammates, they got your back, and just know that you could do this. It's definitely going to make for a lot more of an interesting women's tournament because of the 5 or 6 teams that we listed, because as of right now, it looks like it could be anyone's game to make it to that Final Four and to win the national title. So we'll see what goes on with that. Could be a changing of the guard, but I'm sure South Carolina will have a lot to say about that before we're all said and done.
Yeah, and I think when we were approaching SEC play, we kept saying, this is the biggest stretch of games of the season, and I think that really did help their rankings. You're not losing a lot of ground because, they did get destroyed essentially by UConn, but they already beat these 5, really good basketball
Their resume
teams.
is good.
Their resume is fantastic. There's no concern there. But I think these upcoming 4 games might be even bigger because if you slip up against any of them, you have a much bigger problem on your hands. I mean, even I think was their next game, Arkansas, is probably not going to be an issue. You don't want to say
8 wins, I think 9 wins.
They're 9-18, so they're doubled up on their losses.
Okay,
but after that, Vanderbilt, they're losing to ranked teams, but they still have a lot of wins underneath them. Ole Miss, same thing, and then of course Kentucky ranked at the end of the year. But it's just, if you slip up against any of those, there is something that your team is just not doing right. Because you should, on paper, they should finish out the season ranked.
For sure.
No problem. Or not ranked. They should finish the season, the stretch undefeated. No issue, really. Maybe, a little tough back and forth against Kentucky, but ultimately pull away and put it away. But if you do, then the whole season is recontextualized. Like, okay, we're not defending a national title right now. We need to just make sure we're basically treading water. And I know it sounds a little dramatic to say about a team who just went undefeated and won a national championship.
Exactly.
But, that's the thing. When you reach the mountaintop, now your expectations are as tall as that mountaintop. And if South Carolina doesn't, they don't go undefeated in this stretch, and they don't win the SEC tournament, that kind of makes, it's a bleaker outlook on the dynasty that they've had or the success that they've had. And it's like, is this team good enough to make a deep run? Is it going to be able to stand up for even a deep run at all? Would you even get the shot at defending a national title? So it's just, they need whatever issues they're having. Excuse me, I'm getting too upset.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. They just need to lock in and stop with these mistakes that seem like they're, do the basics right and you'll be fine. And just no slow starts, start off hot and don't turn the ball over. And it's just, and also, maybe don't let the star player go off. Or at least limit them if they do. And it's just those 3 things. It seems like the size difference has not even been a thought since UCLA.
No, it's just fundamentals sometimes. Better shot selection, a little quicker hands on defense, getting your hands up, getting out there to the perimeter. And South Carolina can do that. And that's why this is just, the fact that they got blown out by UConn the way they did is a little more disappointing because just we know deep down, and they know, I'm sure, that they obviously could have had a much better game, that's not the real South Carolina. That is not putting their best foot forward. But I do anticipate that they will. So going over this, I'm still fully confident. I'm fully confident. I'd be shocked if this team did not make it back towards the Final Four again. It's not going to be easy. Not going to be easy. But I'm saying at least the Final Four. Now, otherwise, could encounter some issues. It is going to be and should shape up to be a very intense and a very good battle amongst whatever Final Four we're going to get from this women's tournament. But I am confident that they could at least get themselves back there. Otherwise, throw my hands up on any predictions. But just saying that right now because I know this team can do it. So we'll see what goes on. Right now, still 1-0 mentality, Adam. Let's finish out this regular season. Then I'm looking forward to previewing more of the postseason as we get there.
Yeah, I'm very excited. My football team has not seen the playoffs in a long time. So getting to watch the build-up and getting upset over, our rankings are not as good, or we're not winning as much as we should be. And it's, 3 losses on a season. So it's a different beast. So, get upset at it. But at the same time, it's we're very fortunate to be living through an era where you lose 3 games against 3 very good teams. And, it's a thing to be upset about.
Yeah, being up in arms as people are, but it's just going to be to that point where I'm hoping that they can get themselves together and hit that stride again. They're not undefeated anymore, not as invincible as last year, which is fine because, stating it again, parity for the women's sport overall It's great. It's great to see. I'm hoping we can expand upon that more because that's what has made the men's tournament so interesting. It made it a little more interesting with just some of the faces and the names that really broke out over women's basketball the past few years. But just to be able to have a bit more of that talent up at the top, and you're seeing 6, 7, maybe even 10, 12 teams that actually have a legitimate shot to try and win a national title as opposed to a few. It's just going to make the sport better. And yeah, it'll make things tougher for South Carolina to be able to build the dynasty, but that's where we are right now. So we'll see what goes on with that. I know our Gamecocks are going to be giving everyone their best fight if they could, catch fire again, and we'll see what goes on with that. But SEC tournament right around the corner. It's almost March. We'll see what goes along with this. I do fully anticipate them to easily dispatch the next few teams. Yet again, don't want to look too forward, but let's get things done with that. Let's get through Kentucky at home, Senior Day. Gotta have some good passion on Senior Day, and then that postseason is to come. So we'll keep everyone posted on all that. Just wanted to get our thoughts out there on the, of course, beloved women's basketball team for our Gamecocks that we've just come to love and admire over this past decade with all the success that they have had. And that's what we're looking on to right now. So we're going to be seeing that. Thank you again for everyone who has hung in there to the end of this pod as we look into the rest of our SEC schedule, getting ready for the postseason. We're hype. I hope y'all are hype out there. As always, it is a great time to be a Gamecock. I am Tony here with Adam, and to continue to keep this podcast going, to see us grow, please like this video. Please subscribe on YouTube. Tell your friends. Let people know if they want to, of course, have another platform to comment on or just to talk about or reach out about South Carolina women's basketball or just South Carolina sports in general. Appreciate you for being here. And as always, we'll see you next time.